how do we actually create space to think about the future when we're surrounded by crises and when all the incentives encourage us to just think about today.
How Europe, which becomes smaller and smaller in a bigger world, can answer the challenges.
How foresight could be a successful tool.
This sense that we're at an existential moment where we may be facing global catastrophe.
The current disenchantment with, well, the establishment is because we don't pay attention to the losers.
What are your key takeaways of ESPAS 2016?
So far we have been discussing on big social challenges like the last political changes we have seen this year with Brexit and the US elections and the growing populism. After that we are thinking now on how foresight could be a successful tool to help us and policymakers understand what are those big challenges and give better responses for policymakers.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's been a lot of information to process. There's been conversations about epigenetics, about the future of social welfare, about universal basic income, about how technology is going to change the future. But what I've really taken away from it is the incredible knowledge across Europe about the future and the importance of creating these spaces cross-institutionally to think about them collectively. ESPAS is a really interesting innovation. There's other interesting innovations, for example, the Future of Generations Act in Wales, the future of the committee in the Finnish Parliament, Sri Lanka's new constitution, which is talking about the future. But all these examples are really nice innovations of the kind that people have been mentioning today, which is how can we come up with new solutions to address the challenges that we're facing today.
Thank you very much.
One key takeaway is that in formulating economic growth policies, we do have to take the losers of those policies we formulate into account. Looking at free trade, of course, which we propagate because it's good for economic growth, macroeconomic growth, the effects of rapid technological changes, which we foster as well because that's good for economic growth, but there will be losers, and it sounds so negative, losers, but you know what I mean. And we have to look at that group as well because a huge part of the current disenchantment with, well, the establishment is because we don't pay attention to the losers of our policies.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, actually, I have two takeaways. Now, my first takeaway is that I was surprised that there didn't seem the same sense of urgency about the European project that people in Britain feel, because we feel under siege after Brexit. We feel that after Brexit things are getting progressively worse, and then last week the victory of Trump was terrifying.
Exactly.
And we feel there's a desperate need for Europe to sustain itself as an island of civility. Otherwise we're going to have a world of right-wing populist regimes. And I just was surprised everybody was interested to hear about Brexit. They were interested to talk about Trump and to analyse the victory. But this sense that we're at an existential moment where we may be facing global catastrophe, it's just something I feel didn't seem to be shared among the participants. So that's a bit of a concern. The second takeaway was really what I realised is that there's a lot of discussion about what democracy means.
That's true.
Several people said, well, Trump and Brexit were democratic. And I asked myself, is this really democratic? Can you talk about democracy when you win on the basis of lies? Can you talk about democracy when you don't have deliberation? In Britain, for example, the government says the people have spoken, we don't have to have any debate in Parliament. In my book, that's not democracy. Equally, we have young people here at the meeting saying representative democracy no longer works. Those representatives don't represent us. We've got representative democracy which basically elects a similar group of members of parliament
Right,
every
yeah,
time,
okay.
and people feel unrepresented. And there's discussion about participation. And then there's the problem of what would a democratic European Union look like.
That's right.
I mean, if one were to have democracy on a nation-state model, my feeling is it would be as distant from the citizen as the US government is from its people. So we have to really rethink. And so my big takeaway is I think the project should be a kind of rethinking of democracy in the European context.
Very good. Mary, in the panel I also heard you speaking and asking a question, and there the point of being innovative and creating maybe an innovative new system, imaginatory new system. What can you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yes, absolutely. I think the European Union has been very much built on the nation-state model, and that's what we in Britain who voted Remain feel.
Right.
We're all stuck with this national decision. And it seems to me in the future the European Union should be built on a model that involves individual citizens and involves cities and regions.
Okay.
So my very concrete proposal for now is why not allow all those people who voted Remain to remain as individual European citizens.
That's interesting, yes.
And they could pay a tax which would help recoup the British rebate. I think they would be willing, and in return they would be able to maintain their freedom of movement and their ability to study everywhere. And similarly, those regions that voted Remain, London, Scotland, Northern Ireland, should be able to have some kind of associate membership.
Okay.
And that also might generate some income to compensate for the rebate. So that's just an initial proposal, but one could develop that and try to reproduce it across Europe.
Very interesting. Thank you for taking your time.
This debate allowed to concentrate on the real question. And the real question is how Europe, which becomes smaller and smaller in a bigger world, can answer the challenges. And there the problem is less the European level. It's the role of our small European nation states in a bigger world.
Thank you very much.